My parents forced me to work 2 jobs in college while my sister Julia got everything handed to her on a silver platter. I was 19, pulling double shifts at a campus coffee shop and weekend catering gigs just to afford ramen and textbooks. Meanwhile, Julia spent her freshman year at an elite private college, posting Instagram stories from expensive restaurants and spring break trips to Europe. The contrast was brutal. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. for opening shifts, serve entitled students their vanilla lattes, then rush to classes where I'd fight to stay awake. Evenings meant catering gigs for corporate events, standing on my feet for 8 hours while people in $1,000 suits complained about the temperature of their shrimp cocktail. Julia's biggest stress was choosing between studying abroad in Paris or Rome. When I asked Dad why I had to work while she didn't, he'd give me that patronizing smile. Character building. You'll thank me later. Mom would nod along like his personal cheerleader. Julia's more focused on her studies. She needs fewer distractions. Fewer distractions. Right. Like the designer handbags and weekly spa appointments were helping her focus. My dorm room looked like a disaster zone. Energy drink cans stacked on my desk, textbooks held together with duct tape because I bought them used and abused. My roommate felt so bad for me she started leaving leftover pizza on my bed when she knew I'd worked through dinner again. The physical toll was devastating. My hands were permanently stained from coffee grounds and dish soap. I'd developed a persistent cough from the steam and cleaning chemicals. My back ached constantly from lifting trays and standing for endless hours. I lost 15 pounds in my first semester because I couldn't afford to eat regularly. Meanwhile, Julia was gaining the freshman 15 from sorority mixers and late-night pizza parties funded by Mom and Dad's generous monthly allowance. The social isolation was almost worse than the physical exhaustion. While other students went to parties or study groups, I was wiping down espresso machines or carrying trays of canapes. I watched from the sidelines as my classmates formed friendships and relationships that I was too tired and too busy to participate in. When people asked what I was doing for winter break, I'd mumble something about working extra shifts while they discussed ski trips and family vacations. The divide between my life and theirs felt insurmountable. By sophomore year, I was surviving on 3 hours of sleep. My grades suffered while I scrambled between my psychology classes and serving lattes to students who complained about having to choose between 2 different BMWs for their birthday. The exhaustion was crushing. I'd fall asleep in lectures. My professors started giving me concerned looks. One even pulled me aside. "Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in weeks." I laughed it off, told her I was fine, just busy. Inside, I was drowning. The coffee shop manager, Patricia, tried to help by giving me the best shifts and letting me study during slow periods. But even she couldn't hide her concern. "Honey, you're working yourself to death," she'd say, watching me struggle to stay upright during morning rushes. Patricia had worked her way through college 20 years earlier, but back then, tuition was a fraction of what it cost now. She'd managed with one part-time job and still had time for a social life. "I don't know how you kids do it today," she'd mutter, shaking her head. "The system's rigged against you." I'd brush off her worries with jokes about caffeine addiction and college life, but privately, I knew she was right. I was falling apart. My academic advisor noticed too. When I met with her to discuss my major requirements, she looked concerned about my appearance. "Have you considered reducing your course load? You could graduate in 5 years instead of 4. "I can't afford an extra year of tuition," I explained. She nodded sympathetically, but couldn't offer any real solutions. During midterms, I literally collapsed behind the coffee counter. My manager had to call an ambulance because I'd fainted from exhaustion and dehydration. The paramedic said my blood pressure was dangerously low. "When's the last time you had a full meal?" he asked while checking my vitals. I couldn't remember. Probably 3 days earlier. "And sleep?" "I get some sleep." "How much?" 2, maybe 3 hours a night. He looked at me like I was insane. "You can't keep this up. Your body is shutting down." The ER doctor ran blood tests and found that my electrolyte levels were critically low. I was severely dehydrated and malnourished. She wanted to admit me overnight for observation and IV fluids. "I can't," I told her. "I have to work tonight. You need rest. Your body is in crisis. If I don't work, I can't pay rent." She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed and wrote prescriptions for supplements I couldn't afford. Dad's response when Mom told him? "She's being dramatic. College is supposed to be challenging." Mom suggested I cut back on work hours, but Dad shut that down immediately. "She needs to learn the value of hard work. Julia understands sacrifice. This one just complains." The comparison stung because it was constant. Every phone call home included updates about Julia's academic achievements, her social activities, her bright future. My struggles were dismissed as character flaws. "Julia made Dean's List again," Mom would say, "and she's been elected to student government. You should be more like her." "I'm working 60 hours a week, Mom. When would I have time for student government? If you managed your time better, you'd find a way." The gaslighting was relentless. My exhaustion was laziness. My financial stress was poor planning. My declining grades were lack of motivation. Everything was my fault, while Julia's success was celebrated as natural talent and good character. The breaking point came during finals week. I'd worked a 12-hour catering shift for some tech company's holiday party, serving hors d'oeuvres to executives who tipped in pocket change while discussing their children's trust funds. Then I stayed up all night studying for my abnormal psychology exam. I was so exhausted I could barely see straight. That's when I got the call from my academic advisor. "Your tuition payment was declined," she said gently. "You'll need to settle this before you can take your exams." My stomach dropped. I'd been counting on that tuition payment going through. I'd already maxed out my credit cards for books and basic expenses. I was facing the possibility of not being able to complete my semester. "There must be a mistake," I said. My parents said they'd handle tuition. The payment was attempted 3 times. The bank rejected it each time for insufficient funds. That can't be right. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. My parents had been vague about the tuition payment, telling me not to worry about it, that they'd take care of everything. I called Dad, panicking. "Sorry, kiddo. Money's tight this semester. You'll need to figure something out." His voice was casual. like he was discussing the weather. No urgency, no concern that his daughter might not be able to finish college. What about a loan? Or can you guys help just this once? You're an adult now. Time to solve your own problems. But you promised you'd pay tuition. I planned my whole semester around that. Plans change. Welcome to the real world. That same day, Julia posted a photo from her sorority's winter formal. The dress alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was holding champagne that cost more than I made in a week at the coffee shop. The caption read, "Grateful for parents who support my dreams." The knife twisted deeper when I saw Mom had commented with heart emojis and so proud of our beautiful girl. Something wasn't adding up. Dad owned a successful construction company that had been featured in the local business journal for its growth. Mom worked as a real estate agent in one of the most expensive markets in the state, consistently winning awards for her sales volume. Money tight? For tuition at a state school while they funded private college for my sister? I started digging. That night, instead of studying for finals, I researched my family's financial situation. I found Dad's company listed as a major donor to several local charities. Mom's real estate profile boasted about million-dollar home sales. Their social media showed recent vacation photos from Hawaii. These weren't people struggling with money. I also found property records showing they'd recently purchased a vacation home in the mountains. The down payment alone was more than 4 years of my tuition. Late one night, while working on a research paper about financial stress and family dynamics, I remembered Dad's home office. He always kept it locked, claimed it was for important business documents. He'd made a big show of installing a deadbolt and telling us kids never to go in there without permission. The lock was easier to pick than expected. I'd learned from YouTube tutorials during one of my many sleepless nights, initially thinking it might be useful for getting into locked study rooms at the library. Inside his filing cabinet, behind folders labeled insurance and business expenses, I found a manila envelope marked Julia, Education Fund. My hands shook as I opened it. Bank statements, investment portfolios, a trust fund worth $127,000, established when she was born. Monthly contributions for 18 years, every deposit carefully documented, compound interest calculations, investment growth projections. The account had been managed by a financial advisor who sent quarterly reports praising my parents' commitment to their daughter's future. There were projections showing the fund would cover 4 years of private college tuition, room and board, plus graduate school if needed. There were also receipts for Julia's monthly allowance, $1,200 a month, automatically transferred to her checking account. More than I made working 2 jobs. Then I found the second folder. My name was on it. But instead of bank statements, it contained a single sheet of paper, a life insurance policy, with me as the beneficiary and them as the policyholders, worth $50,000. Established when I turned 18. There was a handwritten note paperclipped to the policy. In case something happens while she's working so much, better safe than sorry. Dad, my blood turned to ice. They weren't planning for my education. They were planning for my death. The implications were staggering. They knew my working schedule was dangerous. They'd seen me collapse, watched me deteriorate, heard about the health scares, and instead of helping, they'd bought insurance. I kept searching. In the back of the cabinet, I found a folder labeled Family Planning, Confidential. Inside were email printouts between Mom and Dad, dating back to when I was 16. The first email from Mom. The financial advisor says we can't fund both kids equally. We need to choose. The trust fund model works best with a single beneficiary for maximum growth potential. Dad's response, Julia has more potential. She's always been the smart one. Gets better grades, more focused, better social skills. The other one will figure it out. Hard work builds character. Mom's reply, what if she finds out about the trust fund? She won't. And if she does, we'll tell her it's about fairness. Some kids need more help than others. Julia's more academically gifted, so she deserves more educational investment. The emails continued for months. They discussed how to make me feel grateful for working, how to frame my struggles as beneficial for my development. They'd even consulted a family therapist about how to manage my likely resentment when I inevitably discovered the financial disparity. The therapist had warned them that financial favoritism could permanently damage family relationships and create lasting psychological trauma in the unfavored child. Dad's response, she'll get over it. Kids always do. And if she doesn't, that's her problem. We can't sacrifice Julia's future for her emotional issues. But the worst email was from Mom, sent just 3 months ago. I'm worried about her health. She looks terrible. Patricia from the coffee shop called me. She's concerned about the fainting episode. Maybe we should help with tuition this semester. Dad's reply, absolutely not. The trust fund is for Julia only. She agreed to maintain a 3.8 GPA in exchange for full funding. The other one can take out loans like everyone else. Character building, remember? Agreed. They had made an actual written agreement with Julia. Academic performance in exchange for full financial support, including a monthly stipend for living expenses. I'd never been given that option. I'd never even been told such an option existed. I found the contract, signed by all 3 of them when Julia started college. In exchange for maintaining her GPA and staying out of serious trouble, they would cover all educational expenses, plus provide a $1,200 monthly allowance for personal expenses, $200 a month. I made less than that working 2 jobs. There were additional clauses about graduate school funding, internship support, and even a post-graduation living allowance while Julia found her first job. I photographed everything with my phone, then carefully put the folders back exactly where I'd found them. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera steady. The betrayal was overwhelming, not just the financial favoritism, but the elaborate deception. The years of gaslighting, making me believe my struggles were normal and necessary. The casual dismissal of my health concerns while they secretly prepared for my potential death. The next morning, I called in sick to both jobs and spent the day at the library, researching family trust law. I learned that as a family member, I had legal rights to information about any trust funds established for siblings, especially if parental assets were involved. I also learned that deliberately hiding financial resources while a child struggles with educational debt could be considered financial abuse in some states. The legal research rabbit hole led me to forums where other young adults shared similar stories. Children who discovered they'd been systematically excluded from family wealth, while siblings received full support. The psychological damage was consistent. Feelings of worthlessness, chronic anxiety about money, damaged relationships with family members. I wasn't alone, but that didn't make it hurt less. One forum post particularly resonated with me. They didn't just steal money from me. They stole my childhood, my health, my sense of self-worth. They watched me struggle and called it character building while secretly funding my sister's dreams. The financial cost is nothing compared to the psychological damage. That evening, I confronted them during dinner. I'd rehearsed the conversation a dozen times, trying to find the right words for an impossible situation. I want to talk about Julia's trust fund, I said calmly, setting down my fork. The color drained from both their faces. Dad choked on his water. Mom's hand flew to her chest like she was having a heart attack. What trust fund? Mom asked, but her voice cracked on every word. The $127,000 education fund you've been contributing to for 18 years. The one that's paying for her private college, her sorority fees, her European vacations, and her monthly allowance. Dad tried to recover, slipping into his authoritative voice. That's private family financial information. You had no right to go through my office, right? You want to talk about rights? What about my right to know that you deliberately chose to fund one daughter while forcing the other into debt and exhaustion? I pulled out the printed emails and spread them across the dinner table like evidence in a court case. Hard work builds character. She'll get over it. Kids always do. Mom started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration at being caught. You don't understand. Julia has always been more academically gifted. You thought what? That I deserved less because I wasn't good enough? That working myself into the ground while you watched was somehow good for me? That's not what we meant, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. We just had to make difficult financial decisions. We can't fund everything for everyone, except you could. Your business is thriving. Mom's making 6 figures. You bought a vacation house last year. You just chose not to fund everything for me. I stood up and threw the life insurance policy on the table. You even took out a policy in case I died from working too much. How's that for planning ahead? The silence was deafening. Mom was openly sobbing now. Dad just stared at the documents like they might disappear if he looked hard enough. We never wanted anything to happen to you, Mom whispered, but you were prepared for it. You knew I was killing myself, and instead of helping, you bought insurance. That's not how, Dad started. That's exactly how it is. You watched your daughter work herself into the ground and took out life insurance instead of offering help. I walked to my childhood bedroom and started packing. Everything I owned fit in 2 suitcases and a backpack. Years of working had left me with no money for possessions. As I packed, I could hear them arguing in hushed tones in the kitchen. This is your fault, Mom hissed. I told you she'd find out eventually. How was I supposed to know she'd break into my office? Because she's smart, you idiot. The same intelligence you've been ignoring for years. Where are you going? Mom called after me as I loaded my car. To finish college without your help. Just like you wanted. You're overreacting, Dad said, following me down the driveway. This is exactly what I mean about your emotional instability. Julia would handle this more maturely. I stopped loading my car and turned to face him. Emotional instability? I've been working myself into the ground while you watched and called it character building. I've maintained a 3.2 GPA while working 60 hours a week. I've never asked for anything except basic fairness. The only unstable thing here is your parenting. He stepped closer, his face reddening. Don't you dare lecture me about parenting. I've provided for this family. You've provided for Julia. I've provided for myself since I was 18, and look how strong it's made you. Strong? I collapsed from exhaustion 3 months ago. I'm malnourished and chronically sleep-deprived. If that's your definition of strong, your parenting philosophy is broken. I got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing in the driveway, finally facing the consequences of their choices. I moved in with my roommate permanently and took out student loans for my remaining tuition. The debt felt crushing, but it was honest debt. Money I owed for my own choices, not gifts I was denied for being the wrong daughter. I also sent copies of the emails to my extended family, including grandparents who had been contributing to what they thought was a shared education fund for both granddaughters. Turns out, they'd been giving my parents $500 a month since I was 12, specifically earmarked for my college education. My parents had been redirecting it to Julia's trust fund for years. My grandfather called me within hours. His voice was shaking with rage. I've been giving your parents $500 a month for your college fund since you were 12. Where did that money go? To Julia's private school and trust fund, apparently. The silence on the phone was deafening. Then, those sons of bitches. I'd never heard my grandfather swear before. Grandpa, no, don't defend them. I specifically asked that money to go to your education fund. They've been stealing from you for years. Within a week, my grandparents had established a separate education account directly in my name with a $15,000 starting balance, the approximate amount they'd been giving my parents annually. They also demanded a full accounting of where their previous contributions had gone and threatened legal action if my parents couldn't provide documentation. My parents tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that they'd been planning to help me eventually, that the trust fund was just a different financial strategy. But the emails proved otherwise. They'd never intended to treat us equally. The family civil war that followed was brutal and swift. My aunt called, furious. I've been giving them money for both kids' college funds for years. Are you telling me none of it went to you? My uncle demanded copies of all the documentation. This is fraud. They took money under false pretenses. My grandmother stopped speaking to my parents entirely. I raised them better than this. I'm ashamed. Even distant relatives reached out with horror stories about family financial abuse, sharing their own experiences with favoritism and deception. The family split down the middle. The older generation sided with me, calling my parents' behavior financial abuse and fraud. My other relatives tried to stay neutral, but privately, many of them started asking uncomfortable questions about the family's financial dynamics. The social consequences extended beyond family. My parents were prominent in their church and community organizations. Word spread quickly about the family drama, and several people approached me independently. We always wondered why you looked so exhausted when Julia seemed so relaxed, one family friend told me. Now it makes sense. Julia called me 3 days after the confrontation, crying hysterically. I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know they were making you work while paying for everything for me. But you knew about the trust fund. You signed a contract. Yes, but I thought you had one too. They told me we both did, but yours was structured differently. They said you preferred to work for your independence. Even in this, they'd lied. To both of us, but in different ways. They'd told her I was choosing to work, that I was proud and independent and didn't want handouts. They'd made her believe I was rejecting help rather than being denied it. They told me you thought trust funds were for spoiled kids, she continued, that you wanted to earn your own way. I actually admired you for it. The manipulation was even more sophisticated than I'd realized. They'd crafted separate narratives for each of us, designed to prevent us from comparing our situations or questioning the disparity. She offered to share her trust fund, to split it equally between us, but I declined. The damage was already done. She'd spent 4 years living a completely different life while I'd nearly worked myself into a breakdown. You can't undo that kind of disparity. I want to help somehow, she insisted. Then don't waste the opportunities you've been given. Make sure they count for something. The psychological impact was becoming clearer as I talked to a counselor at the student health center. Years of being told my struggles were character building while watching my sister receive unconditional support had created deep-seated beliefs about my worth. I believed I had to earn love through suffering, that I deserved less than other people, that asking for help was weakness. Those beliefs didn't disappear just because I'd uncovered the truth. The therapist explained that financial favoritism in families creates lasting trauma that goes beyond money. Children internalize the message that they are inherently worth less than their siblings. It affects every relationship, every career decision, every moment of self-doubt. Your parents didn't just deny you financial support, she said. They systematically undermined your sense of self-worth while watching you struggle. That's emotional abuse disguised as character building. With my grandparents' support and student loans, I was able to complete my degree without the crushing weight of full-time work. The final semester, without the exhaustion and stress, my grades improved dramatically. I made Dean's List for the first time. I finished college debt-free thanks to my grandparents and graduated with a 3.6 GPA despite everything. The improvement in my academic performance once I could focus on studying proved that my previous struggles weren't due to lack of ability. I got into graduate school with full funding and a research assistantship, studying family financial dynamics and their psychological effects. My personal experience became the foundation for academic research that would eventually help other families. My dissertation topic practically chose itself: the long-term psychological effects of financial favoritism in family systems. My parents attended my graduation ceremony. They sat in the back row and didn't speak to me afterward. I saw them whispering to other family members, probably trying to manage the narrative about our estrangement. During the reception, my grandfather made a point of loudly congratulating me and mentioning how proud he was that his financial support had helped me succeed. Several family friends asked follow-up questions that left my parents looking uncomfortable. I'm so glad we could finally support her education properly, grandmother said pointedly when people asked about my success. It's amazing what young people can accomplish when they're not forced to work themselves to death. 2 years into graduate school, Dad had a heart attack. While he was in the hospital, Mom called me for the first time in months. He wants to apologize, she said. He knows what we did was wrong. Does he? Yes. He's been talking to a therapist in the hospital about family relationships and financial decisions. He wants to make it right. There's still some money left in the business accounts. He wants to give it to you. I don't want his money, I said. I never did. I wanted his respect. I wanted to be treated like I mattered as much as Julia did. You do matter. We love you. You loved the idea of me, the hard-working daughter who'd be grateful for scraps while you gave her sister everything. We made mistakes. Mistakes? You systematically excluded me from family resources while watching me work myself into the ground. You took money from grandparents that was meant for my education and gave it to Julia instead. You planned for my potential death rather than offering help. Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. I hung up. Dad recovered from the heart attack, but our relationship never did. He sent letters that I didn't open. He left voicemails that I deleted without listening. The apology I might have accepted years earlier felt hollow now, motivated more by his mortality than genuine remorse. Through my research, I learned that late-life reconciliation attempts from abusive parents often follow this pattern. Health scares or approaching death inspire guilt, but not necessarily understanding of the damage they caused. I went on to earn my PhD in clinical psychology, specializing in family financial trauma. My dissertation examined the long-term psychological effects of financial favoritism in families. It was published and became required reading in several family therapy programs. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had created the exact expertise that allowed me to help other families avoid destroying their relationships with money. My practice grew as word spread about my unique specialization. I counseled families dealing with similar dynamics: parents who favored one child financially, siblings dealing with inheritance disputes, young adults recovering from financial abuse. Each case reminded me that my experience wasn't unique, just particularly well documented. I also began speaking at conferences about family financial trauma, sharing research that showed how economic favoritism creates lasting psychological damage. My presentations always filled up quickly. Apparently, this was a more common problem than most people realized. One of my most popular papers examined the health consequences of financial stress in young adults. The data was stark. Students working more than 30 hours per week while attending school full-time showed significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, and physical health problems. The research gave academic legitimacy to what I'd lived through. 5 years into my practice, I was contacted by a journalist working on an investigative series about financial abuse in families. She'd read my research and wanted to interview me about the broader social implications. The article, when it was published, sparked national conversation about how families use money to control and manipulate their children. My parents, carefully anonymized, became a case study in how financial favoritism perpetuates cycles of dysfunction. Last month, I received a wedding invitation. Julia was getting married and she wanted me there. We'd rebuilt our relationship slowly over the years. After college, she'd gone into social work, partially motivated by guilt over the advantages she'd received. She worked with at-risk youth, often staying late and taking on extra cases without additional pay. I need to balance the scales somehow, she'd told me during one of our carefully reconstructed conversations. I got so much that I didn't earn. She'd also undergone therapy to process her own guilt about the financial disparity. The therapist had helped her understand that she wasn't responsible for our parents' choices, but that didn't erase her feelings about benefiting from favoritism. We talked regularly now, but I'd kept my distance from family events where my parents would be present. The wound had scarred over, but it was still tender to the touch. I want you as my maid of honor, she said when she called about the wedding. You're the one who taught me what real strength looks like. I attended the wedding. My parents were there, older and somehow smaller than I remembered. Dad walked with a cane now, a reminder of the heart attack. Mom had gone gray, though she tried to hide it with aggressive hair dye that fooled no one. They looked diminished, not just physically, but socially. Several family members gave them cold shoulders. Others were polite but distant. The consequences of their choices had followed them into their later years. During the reception, Dad approached me at the bar. I was getting a drink and trying to avoid the family photo session. I read your article, he said quietly, the one about financial favoritism in families. I'd published a research paper the year before. It had gotten national attention and was being used in family therapy training programs across the country. Did you? You used our family as a case study, didn't you? The paper was carefully anonymized, but the details would be recognizable to anyone who knew our story. I'd changed names and locations, but the emotional architecture was identical. I used my experience to help other families avoid the same mistakes. He nodded slowly, looking older than his 62 years. The therapist we consulted back then warned us this would happen. She said you'd never forgive us. I have forgiven you, I said, and meant it. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. What would you have needed? Back then, the question I'd wanted him to ask for 15 years. Honesty, equity, to be treated like I was worth the same investment as my sister. And now, I looked across the reception at Julia, laughing with her new husband. She was happy, successful, and kind despite the advantages she'd received. We'd both turned out fine, just along very different paths. Now I help other families choose differently. Before I could leave, Mom approached. She looked nervous, clutching a small wrapped box. I wanted to give you this, she said, holding it out like an offering. Inside was a check for $127,000, the exact amount of Julia's trust fund. It's too late for college, she said, but maybe it's not too late for us. I stared at the check. After all these years, the grand gesture I'd once desperately wanted felt meaningless. This doesn't fix anything, I said, handing it back. I know, but it's equal now. That's what you wanted, right? Equality? I wanted equality when it mattered. When I was 19 and falling asleep in my textbooks. When I was fainting from exhaustion behind a coffee counter. When I thought there was something wrong with me that made me worth less than my sister. Mom started crying again, the same frustrated tears from years before. We were trying to do what was best. Best for who? Best for Julia? Best for your own consciences? Because it certainly wasn't best for me. We thought if we made things too easy for you, you wouldn't develop character. Character. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what builds character? Support? Encouragement? Being told you're worth investing in. Not watching your child work herself into the ground while you funded her sister's spring break trips. Dad had been listening from a distance, but now he approached slowly. We can't change the past, he said, but maybe we can do something about the future. The future? I looked between them. You mean your future, your guilt, your need for absolution before you get too old to live with what you did. That's not fair, Mom whispered. Fair? You want to talk about fair now? I took the check from the table and held it up. This is what fair looks like to you. A check. Money thrown at a problem you created through years of deliberate choices. I tore the check in half. I don't want your money. I never wanted your money. I wanted to be your daughter. I wanted to matter as much as Julia mattered. The pieces of the check fluttered to the floor. Dad bent to pick them up, his hands shaking slightly. We can write another one, he said desperately. You still don't understand. This isn't about the money. This is about the message you sent every single day for years, that I was worth less, that my struggles were good for me while Julia's comfort was necessary, that my potential death was worth insuring against, but not worth preventing. Julia appeared at my elbow, having noticed the commotion. What's going on? Your parents are trying to buy forgiveness, I said, with the exact amount of your trust fund. Her face went white. Mom? Dad? What are you doing? We're trying to make things right, Mom said. By throwing money at her? At my wedding? Julia's voice was sharp. This is exactly what she's been trying to tell you. You think everything can be fixed with money. We don't know what else to do, Dad said. and for the first time he sounded genuinely lost. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. But pity wasn't enough to bridge the chasm they'd created. You could start by acknowledging what you actually did, I said. Not just that you made mistakes. That you systematically favored one daughter over the other. That you took money specifically given for my education and gave it to Julia instead. That you watched me work myself into the hospital and called it character building. We acknowledge that, Mom said quickly. Do you? Because every conversation we've had, you've minimized it. Called it difficult financial decisions. Claimed you were doing what was best. You've never once said, we were wrong to treat you differently. We were wrong to watch you suffer. We were wrong to lie about the money. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Dad spoke. We were wrong. Wrong about what, specifically? He struggled with the words. We were wrong to treat you differently than Julia. And we were wrong to watch you struggle without helping. And we were wrong about the money. About taking your grandparents' contributions and giving them to Julia. It was a start, but the words felt rehearsed, like something his hospital therapist had coached him to say. Why? I asked. Why did you do it? This time, the silence lasted longer. Because we thought Julia had more potential, Mom whispered finally, and we were wrong about that too. There it was. The truth they'd been dancing around for years. Julia didn't have more potential. She had more support. She had parents who believed in her success instead of parents who thought struggle would make her stronger. You're right, Dad said, and his voice was hoarse. You're absolutely right. I know I'm right. I've spent years studying families like ours. I know exactly what you did and why you did it and how it affects children. The question is whether you actually understand the damage you caused or whether you just want me to stop being angry about it. Julia took my hand. Can I say something? I nodded. I've been in therapy for 3 years, dealing with the guilt of being the favored child. Do you know what that does to someone? Knowing your success came at your sister's expense? She looked at our parents. I can't enjoy anything I have because I know she suffered for it. I can't celebrate my achievements because they were bought with her pain. You didn't just hurt her. You poisoned my accomplishments too. Mom was crying openly now. We never meant. You never thought. Julia cut her off. You never considered what this would do to either of us. You just decided one daughter was worth more than the other and acted accordingly. The wedding reception continued around us, but our little family drama had created an island of tension. Other guests were starting to notice. We should take this somewhere private, Julia said. No. I was done hiding their failures. I've kept their secrets long enough. I spent years protecting their reputation while they destroyed mine. Please, Mom begged. People are watching. Let them watch. Let them see what financial favoritism looks like. Maybe it will help them make better choices with their own children. Dad was staring at the torn check on the floor. What do you want from us? He asked. Tell me what we can do to fix this. You can't fix it. You can't give me back the sleep I lost or the health I damaged. You can't undo the years of believing I was worth less than my sister. You can't restore the trust you broke or the relationship you poisoned. So that's it? We can never make amends? I thought about that question for a long moment. You can stop trying to make amends and start making changes. You can acknowledge the full scope of what you did without minimizing it or making excuses. You can understand that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, and that acceptance doesn't mean relationship. We want a relationship with you, Mom said desperately. You had 18 years to build a relationship with me. You chose to build one with Julia instead. I'm not going to pretend those years didn't matter. Julia squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered, for all of it. You don't need to apologize. You were a child. You didn't choose how they treated us, but I benefited from it. And you've spent years trying to balance that out. You became a social worker. You help kids who don't have advantages. You turned privilege into purpose. She smiled through her tears. Is that enough? It's enough for me. I turned back to our parents. That's the difference between Julia and you. She took what she was given and used it to help others. You gave her advantages and expected her to be grateful for your generosity, not understanding the cost. We understand now, Dad said. Do you? Then prove it. Not with money or grand gestures. Prove it by changing how you talk about what happened. Stop calling it mistakes or difficult decisions. Call it what it was. Favoritism, financial abuse, poor parenting. We can do that, Mom said quickly. And stop expecting gratitude for paying for college tuition now. I'm 31 years old with a PhD and a successful practice. I don't need your college fund. That ship sailed a decade ago. Then what do you need? The question caught me off guard. What did I need from them? Honesty. Not just about the money, but about everything. About why you chose Julia over me. About what you told yourselves to justify it. About whether you would make the same choice again. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. That last one's a hard question, isn't it? I said. Because you want to say no, you wouldn't make the same choice. But you're not actually sure. We wouldn't, Mom said, but her voice wavered. Really? If you had 2 daughters again, and one seemed more academically gifted, more socially successful, more likely to make you proud at dinner parties, you wouldn't be tempted to invest more heavily in that child? The hesitation was telling. We'd try to treat them equally, Dad said finally. Try. That's the problem. Equal treatment shouldn't be something you have to try to do. It should be automatic. The fact that you have to work at it means you still don't understand what you did wrong. Julia had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. They still compare us, even now. In therapy, Mom talks about how proud she is that I'm a social worker, but then mentions how successful you are as if it's a competition. We don't mean it that way, Mom protested. But that's how it comes across. Like you're still measuring us against each other. I nodded. That's exactly right. You turned us into competitors instead of sisters. And even now, you can't see us as separate people with different paths. You see us as reflections of your parenting choices. The wedding band started playing and guests began moving toward the dance floor. Our intense family meeting was becoming increasingly conspicuous. I should go, I said. This is Julia's wedding. She shouldn't have to spend it managing family drama. Don't leave because of us, Julia said. Stay. Dance with me. Let's celebrate something good for once. I looked at my sister, beautiful in her wedding dress, trying to salvage joy from a painful moment. Okay, but they need to go. I turned to my parents. You should leave. Not because I hate you or because I'm punishing you, but because your presence here is a reminder of years of pain, and Julia deserves better on her wedding day. You're banishing us from our daughter's wedding? Mom asked, incredulous. I'm giving you an opportunity to put Julia's happiness before your own comfort, for once. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but Julia spoke first. She's right. You should go. Julia? Mom started. No. I've spent years making excuses for you, trying to keep the family together. But she's right. Your presence here is making everything about the past instead of my future. They left quietly, and the wedding reception continued. Julia and I danced, and for the first time in years, we felt like sisters instead of casualties of our parents' choices. Later that night, Julia called me from her honeymoon suite. Thank you, she said, for making them leave, for protecting my wedding. Thank you for supporting me, for not making me choose between confronting them and celebrating with you. I love you, she said, and I'm proud of who you've become despite everything. I love you too, and I'm proud of who you've become because of everything. 6 months later, I received a letter from Dad. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter. He'd been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. The disease would progress slowly, but eventually he would forget everything, including the choices he'd made as a parent. I wanted to write this while I still can, the letter said. Not to ask for forgiveness, but to record the truth. We treated you badly. We favored Julia and told ourselves it was for your own good. We were wrong. We were selfish. We were cowards. I don't expect you to reconcile with us before I forget who you are. But I want you to know that I remember what we did and I'm sorry for all of it. Not sorry we got caught. Sorry we did it in the first place. You became an extraordinary person not because of our poor parenting, but in spite of it. That's your achievement, not ours. I kept the letter, but didn't respond. A year later, Mom called to tell me Dad was getting worse. He'd started forgetting recent events, then more distant memories. Soon, he would forget us entirely. Do you want to see him? She asked. Before he forgets who you are? I thought about it for a long time. In the end, I decided not to visit. Not out of anger or revenge, but because the man who was forgetting everything wasn't the man who had made those choices. The disease would erase his memory of our family dynamic, but it couldn't erase the consequences. I was content to let him forget. I'd spent too many years carrying the weight of his choices to take on the burden of his forgetting too. 3 years after Julia's wedding, I published my second book, The Favorite Child: How Financial Favoritism Destroys Families. It became a bestseller and established me as the leading expert on family financial trauma. During book tours, parents would approach me with tears in their eyes, confessing their own struggles with favoritism. Many made immediate changes to their family financial planning. Others started family therapy. The book saved relationships I'd never know about. Julia wrote the foreword. In it, she described the guilt of being the favorite child and the work she'd done to process that privilege. She emphasized that favoritism hurts both children, the forgotten one and the chosen one. My sister didn't just save herself, she wrote. She saved our relationship and probably prevented me from repeating our parents' mistakes with my own children. She was pregnant with her first child, a daughter they planned to name after our grandmother, the one who had supported my education when my parents wouldn't. Today, I run a practice specializing in family financial therapy. I help parents understand that money is never just about money. It's about love, worth, and belonging. I help siblings navigate the complex emotions of financial favoritism. I help young adults recover from financial abuse. Every client is a chance to prevent another family from making the choices my parents made. The work is healing not just for them, but for me. Every family I help feel like progress towards something better. Every sibling relationship I save feels like a small victory against the forces that tried to destroy mine. My parents are both gone now. Dad's Alzheimer's progressed rapidly, and Mom died of a heart attack 2 years later. Julia and I inherited their estate equally. A final, meaningless gesture of equity. We donated most of it to organizations supporting students from low-income families. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. Others end with understanding and acceptance. Mine ended with purpose and peace. I never got the apology I needed when I needed it, but I got something better. The knowledge that their failures became my strength, their mistakes became my mission, and their favoritism became the foundation for helping other families choose love over preference. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong about who you could become. Sometimes it's using their failures to prevent other children from experiencing the same pain. That's character building.